Welcome to the Synoptic Gospel, Overview of the Gospel Series, Part 6, A Unified Gospel. So, to review, we have inherited these 4 different Gospels, each of which contains many similarities amongst many differences, and this is confusion, and it prevents the mind from being able to quickly see all that Jesus himself said and did. What is needed, in my humble opinion, and the opinion of anyone who has given it much thought, is a unified Gospel, a single clear account and record of all that Jesus said and did and taught during his short earthly life and ministry, all of the stories and sayings, all of his deeds and parables, and all of his mighty miracles. Over the past almost 2,000 years, there have been many attempts to parallel the storylines of the New Testament Gospels and to line up their overlapping passages side by side in what is known as a harmony. It is noted that due to its limited amount of overlap in stories that parallel with the other 3 Gospels, many of these harmonies have not traditionally included the words of the Gospel of John. Whether they include John or not, all Gospel harmonies are based on a list of all of the related and overlapping events, the verses of which are laid out and sorted according to a timeline that is established for the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, beginning with his birth or the beginning of his ministry, and ending with his death and resurrection, and that usually looks something like this. Getting the entire sequence of all of the overlapping events in the most correct or logical order is an extremely difficult and complicated task, and we'll talk more about this later. The next part of the harmonization process is to closely align and group those sets of verses that are clearly parallel, and this usually looks something like this. Here's one of the best-selling books on the subject called A Harmony of the Gospels. It was first published in 1922, and you can see that it does little more than put all of the sets of parallel verses in columns side by side, which is useful but may actually in some ways cause more confusion, as now you have to read each of these sections of verses and then arrive at the balance point of personal truth and understanding about what your mind can sort out from all of the details and the differing sequence in which they are sometimes presented. Here's a more modern example of a harmony of the 4 Gospels. As you can see, this one is color-coded, I suppose for ease of reading, which is pretty, but perhaps not necessary, because as with trying to read any text against a colored background, it can be difficult. Either way, again, to see all that Jesus said and did, you really have to read each of these, and then decide what the consensus of their words indicate most likely happened, or what it was that Jesus said or did. So these harmonies are good and useful, and they help to show the full context of multi-gospel events from the life of Jesus. And while there is now less confusion about what happened, the overlap and differing sequence of those events can cause a new type of uncertainty, because what harmonies do not do is to combine or unify the actual words of the overlapping gospel accounts. Once the parallel passages are first lined up beside each other in a harmony like this, there are several ways of combining and harmonizing or unifying the words so that the storyline is now a single complete text, and a work that harmonizes the words of the overlapping verses is called a merger. One of the major steps when merging 2 of anything is to remove all of the overlap and unnecessary duplication between them, which then leaves everything else. But where there is a difference within 2 parallel verses of even a single word, a choice has to be made as to which words or wording to keep and which words can be considered redundant, unnecessary duplication, and ignored. And this is a very difficult task, to make the choice that best maintains the true flow of the thought and action. In the case of these verses, that might look something like this. Of course, this is a very simple set of parallel verses, with only a few small differences that necessitated making a choice as to which words from which Gospels would be retained, and which were duplication and could be ignored and removed. Over the years, there have only been a few attempts to line up and unify the synoptic portions of the 3 or 4 Gospels like this, to form a single complete gospel text. So a question to ask is, why have there been so few attempts over the millennia to merge the texts of the Gospels into a single unified account? And why have none of those that have existed since Tatian's Diatessaron 1,800 years ago ever been accepted by the Church to again enjoy widespread use, as the Diatessaron once enjoyed in the Roman and Eastern churches? Part of the answer might come from a long-held prohibition by the Church on altering or changing the words of God in the Bible, and that usually comes from 4 warnings in the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John, where 4 times it warns against, as it puts it, altering the words of the book of this prophecy and of the prophecy of this book. What people do not realize today is that the English word Bible is from the Latin biblios, which means little books, and this means that the book of Revelation was a separate book, as are all of the 27 little books of the New Testament. And this was the case even after the New Testament was canonized as one volume by the Roman Catholic Church in the year 405, which was about 300 years after the book of Revelation was written. To create the New Testament, or the New Covenant of Jesus Christ, the 27 little books of the New Testament were bound as a single volume to form a single book, with the book of Revelation containing these warnings written by John now placed as the very last book. So clearly, this repeated warning is really only about altering the words of the book of Revelation itself, because while it is best not to alter the written word of God, this is particularly the case if you change or alter the words of the prophecy of the book of Revelation, because then you would not know the sequence of the devastating signs and global calamities that precede the return of the Word of God to the earth in glory. So while it may appear logical to apply the warnings in the book of Revelation to the entire Bible, this is not really the case, just because the book of Revelation is the last book in most Bibles. So, partly because of this, since the canonization of the Vulgate Biblios in 405 CE, the Catholic Church, having eliminated the use of the unified gospel Diatessaron, has prohibited any changes or alterations to the words of the Bible or its canon, except, of course, for its own alterations. And this prohibition has included the use of only the 4 Gospels that had originally been chosen by Tatian and included in the Diatessaron. Another reason why there have been so few attempts to produce a single unified gospel by merging all of their words is that until the recent invention of the computer, this was a very difficult task to do well, or accurately by hand. Others have asked, why merge the 4 Gospels at all? It is important that the 4 different Gospels are preserved to show what was said to the particular audience of each of those 4 accounts. Yes, that is true, and the world will always have the 4 Gospels as they now appear in all versions and translations of the New Testament of the Holy Bible. However, it is reasonable and even beneficial that the overlap and gaps between the accounts be reconciled for continuity, completeness, and ease of flow, all of which help to increase our understanding of knowing what Jesus said and did, which is the gospel message. Therefore, one of the main reasons to combine the 4 gospel records into a single unified storyline is to try and resolve some of the apparent conflicts between the accounts, both in the specifics of what happened and also in the chronological sequence of the sayings and events, while keeping the entire storyline of the life of Jesus Christ as simple and clear and easy to understand as possible. A unified gospel for the entire world would eliminate confusion and even conflicts and restore the meaning of Jesus' words to the apostles to go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Jesus said to preach the gospel, one single story, not the gospels with confusion. This ends part 6 of the Synoptic Gospel overview of the Gospels.